You're soaking wet. What are you doing out here? He called out, half angry, half concerned. Maya looked up, clutching her lunchbox tighter. It's okay, sir, she said. I'm used to it. The downpour drowned everything else. The traffic, the thunder, even hummed the city that never slept. All he could see was a woman in a soaked blue uniform, clutching a plastic container of rice and chicken, shivering beneath a tree as if she were hiding from the world. The storm that afternoon had come out of nowhere. Battery Park City, usually all sunlight, glass, and order, was now blurred into silver sheets of rain. The pavement gleamed like mirrors, and somewhere between the glint of luxury cars and dripping umbrellas, she sat, Maya Fred, his cleaning lady. Her yellow gloves were still on, the same ones she wore while scrubbing his marble counters that morning. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her uniform darkened by rain, and her hands trembled as she tried to eat. Each bite dissolved into the storm before it could reach her lips. From inside his black Mercedes, Michael Williams watched her through the windshield, unsure his eyes were playing tricks on him. Was that really Maya? Out here? In this? He blinked hard, leaned forward, and turned off the wipers. But there she was, small, fragile, unmoving. He stepped out, the cold slapping his face as he crossed the lawn. The rain was merciless, soaking through his suit in seconds. He had to see for himself why someone would choose to sit in the rain like that when warmth and shelter were just feet away. That was the moment when the man who thought he had everything, wealth, power, control, realized he might not understand humanity at all. Before we go further, if you've ever passed someone struggling and told yourself it wasn't your place to help, pause for a second. Because sometimes it takes one soaked lunch, one human moment, to remind us what empathy really costs. What Michael didn't know that day, standing drenched before his own house, was that this simple act of curiosity would unravel everything he believed about success, class, and kindness. The storm that afternoon had come out of nowhere. Sheets of rain blurred the skyline of lower Manhattan, washing the city in gray light. Michael stood only a few feet from her now, his expensive shoes sinking into the soft, rain-soaked grass. Maya, he said, his voice breaking through the downpour, why are you out here? She startled as if waking from a dream. Her gloved hands fumbled to close the cheap lunchbox, her eyes darting anywhere but his. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, she whispered, her breath trembling. I didn't want to make a mess inside. He blinked through the rain. A mess? Maya, there's an entire break room. You shouldn't be sitting out here like this. She shook her head quickly, strands of wet hair clinging to her cheeks. It's fine, sir. I'll finish soon. Something in her tone, soft, rehearsed, almost pleading, made him stop pressing. The air between them felt thick, heavier than the storm itself. For a moment, he wanted to ask again, to insist she tell him the real reason. But her eyes, those tired, fearful eyes, made him swallow the question. He turned and walked back toward his car, the rain hammering the hood as he opened the door. Behind him, Maya didn't move. She stayed there, hunched under the tree, eating as though the world had given her no other place to exist. Inside, the leather seat felt cold against his back. He sat for a long time before starting the engine. His reflection in the windshield looked older somehow, lonely, despite everything he owned. Back inside the townhouse, the walls fell hollow. The sound of the storm outside echoed through the high ceilings. He tried to eat lunch, but every bite turned to dust in his mouth. His chef's careful plating, the imported wine, all of it tasted meaningless compared to that soaked woman beneath the tree. That night, he lay awake listening to the city's hum below his window. The rain had stopped, but his mind didn't. Maya's voice replayed again and again. I didn't want to make a mess. When had success become an excuse to stop seeing people? When had his wealth started to blind him to the humanity inside his own house? If you ever looked away from someone who was struggling because it was easier than asking why, take a moment. Sometimes, the smallest glance of compassion can save a life you didn't even know was breaking. Michael closed his eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come until he understood her silence. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find out the truth. The next morning, the city was washed clean but eerily quiet. The storm had passed, yet the weight of it still lingered in Michael's chest. He couldn't shake the image of Maya sitting beneath that tree, her shoulders curled inward like someone trying to disappear. By noon, he called for Thomas, the head of household staff. The older man entered with his usual calm professionalism, adjusting his tie before speaking. "Thomas," Michael began, pretending to look over some papers on his desk, "I wanted to ask you about Maya Fred." Thomas hesitated. "Yes, sir." "Does she always eat outside?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that carried more truth than words ever could. Thomas lowered his gaze. "She has, yes, for a while now." Michael frowned. "Why?" "There's an entire dining area for staff." Thomas exhaled slowly. "A few months back, one of your guests made a remark during a dinner. Said something about a strong detergent smell. Maya happened to be in the corner eating before her shift ended. The guest told her it was unpleasant." Michael's hand froze over the papers. "What did I do?" "You laughed, sir," Thomas said gently. "Everyone did. It seemed harmless at the time." The words hit him like cold water. Laughed. He remembered the dinner party, the expensive wine, the bright chatter, the careless arrogance that floated around the table. He'd been proud that night, showing off his new renovation, his art, his view. He hadn't noticed the young woman cleaning up in the background. He hadn't noticed the way she'd quietly vanished after the joke. He leaned back, his throat tight. "And since then, she eats outside?" "Yes, sir." She said she didn't want to disturb anyone again. The silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. That afternoon, he found Maya polishing the staircase railing, her yellow gloves glinting in the light. "Maya," he said softly, "you can use the dining room again if you want." She paused, eyes downcast. "It's fine, sir. I prefer it outside." Her tone was light, but something in it broke him. She wasn't angry. She was resigned, used to being unseen, unheard. As she walked away, the echo of her footsteps filled the hall like a memory he couldn't silence. For the first time, Michael realized how easy it was to build a mansion so big that you couldn't hear the people suffering inside it. The next evening, Michael couldn't sit still. The question that had been gnawing at him since the storm refused to fade. Who was Maya when no one was looking? When she left the townhouse at the end of her shift, he followed, carefully, discreetly. His black sedan trailed a few cars behind the city bus she boarded, its windows fogged by the evening chill. He didn't know what he was expecting to find, only that he needed to understand. The bus rolled north, away from Battery Park's glass towers and clean streets. The city changed block by block, the lights dimmer, the sidewalks cracked, the buildings older. By the time she stepped off in the Bronx, the skyline of Manhattan was just a memory in the distance, glowing like another world entirely. Maya walked quickly, clutching her worn tote close to her chest. She turned down a narrow street line with aging brownstones and flickering streetlights. He parked a block away and followed on foot, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored coat and polished shoes. She stopped at a small brick building with peeling paint and climbed a narrow stairwell. Through a half-drawn curtain on the second floor, he caught a glimpse inside, a cramped apartment, walls marked by time. At a wooden table sat a boy, maybe 10, his pencil scratching across a workbook under the soft, erratic flicker of a single bulb. When Maya entered, the boy looked up, his face lighting up like sunrise. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and pulled something from her tote, the same lunchbox he'd seen in the rain. She placed it on the table and opened it. Inside was barely a serving left, rice, a few pieces of chicken. She pushed it toward him, saying something Michael couldn't hear, then watched as her son began to eat. She didn't touch a single bite. A lump rose in his throat. She wasn't just tired. She was starving so her child wouldn't be. From the shadows of the street, Michael whispered to himself, "She worked 2 jobs to give him a future I never even asked for myself." For the first time in years, his chest ached, not from stress, not from ambition, but from empathy. As he turned to leave, the city lights of Manhattan shimmered faintly across the river, but for once, they didn't look like success. They looked like distance, the distance between his world and hers. Sleep refused to come that night. Every time Michael closed his eyes, he saw her, Maya, sitting under that tree, rain dripping from her hair, those yellow gloves clinging to her hands. Then the image would shift. Her small apartment, her son's wide grin as he ate the food she'd saved for him. The contrast was unbearable. He got up before dawn and wandered through the house. The marble floors echoed beneath his steps, every sound sharp in the stillness. The walls, polished and perfect, seemed colder than ever. Every piece of art, every imported rug, every glittering surface, all suddenly meaningless. For years, he had measured his worth in numbers: square footage, stock prices, headlines. Success, he believed, was about control. But as he stood in the quiet emptiness of his living room, he couldn't help wondering, what had he built, really? An empire of wealth, maybe, but not of warmth. He looked out the window toward the Hudson, where the first traces of daylight shimmered on the water. Somewhere out there, Maya was already on her way to her second job, fighting exhaustion for a paycheck that barely covered rent. She'd probably be smiling, too, the kind of smile that said, "I'm fine," when she clearly wasn't. Michael rubbed his hands together, guilt gnawing at him. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like he'd been living inside a glass box, one that kept comfort in and humanity out. He sat at the dining table and poured himself a cup of coffee he didn't drink. His reflection stared back on the black liquid. Tired eyes, expensive shirt, hollow expression. For the first time, he didn't see power or success looking back at him. He saw a man who had stopped noticing people. If this story stirs something in you, that quiet ache that says we've forgotten how to care, don't ignore it. Maybe this is your reminder to see the people you pass every day. The ones who clean, who serve, who show up even when no one's watching. Sometimes all they need is to be seen. Michael pushed the cup away and stood. He couldn't change the past, but he could change what happened next. He didn't know how yet, not fully, but one thing was certain. He would not keep walking past Maya Fred as if she were invisible. The following morning, Michael asked Thomas to have Maya sent to his office. His voice was calm, but his heart wasn't. For the rest of the staff, it was just another weekday. Polished floors, quiet footsteps, the faint smell of cleaning polish in the air. But for Michael, it felt like something inside him was about to shift. When Maya walked in, she looked uneasy, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She still wore her uniform, her hair neatly tied back, the yellow gloves tucked in her apron pocket. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit." She hesitated. "If I did something wrong, I can—" "You didn't," he interrupted gently. "This isn't that kind of conversation." She sat, her shoulders tense. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain tapped lightly against the window, faint but steady, like a reminder of the day that had started all this. "I owe you an apology, Maya," Michael finally said. "For that dinner, for laughing, for not noticing what it did to you." Her eyes widened slightly, confusion crossing her face. "You don't have to apologize, sir. It's in the past. I'm just grateful to work here." That simple sentence, spoken with humility instead of resentment, cut deeper than any accusation could have. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was thankful to the very person whose indifference had caused her pain. He leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "You've worked harder for your son than I've ever worked for my own heart," he said. "I see that now, and I'm sorry it took me this long to realize it." Maya blinked, her eyes glistening, though she said nothing. There was grace in her silence, the kind that didn't demand recognition, only respect. When she finally left the office, closing the door quietly behind her, Michael remained seated, staring at the papers on his desk without seeing them. For years, those documents, contracts, investments, forecasts, had represented everything that mattered. Now, they looked small, meaningless. He knew what he had to do, but it couldn't be charity. She didn't need pity. She needed opportunity, a chance to live the kind of life her work and sacrifice deserved. As the rain outside turned to sunlight, Michael Williams began a plan. The following week, Michael sat in his study long after the morning light had filled the room. The decision he had made was clear. but the weight of it pressed against him in a way no business deal ever had. This wasn't about numbers or strategy. It was about doing something that finally meant something. He called in his lawyer first, then the head of HR. They exchanged curious glances as they took their seats across from him, papers and pens ready. Michael's voice was calm but firm. "I want to establish a trust fund," he said, "for Maya Fred's son. Full educational coverage, tuition, housing, everything he'll ever need to finish school." The lawyer blinked. "That's generous, Mr. Williams." "It's not generosity," Michael replied quietly. "It's justice." They went through the details for hours. Michael signed document after document, his signature steady, his heart uncharacteristically light. Before they left, he added one final instruction: and review the staff policy. Benefits, salaries, leave. No one who works here should ever feel less than human in my home. When the room emptied, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. Outside, sunlight glinted off the glass towers of Battery Park, sharp and golden. It felt like the world was finally starting to breathe again. The next morning, Maya was called to his office. She entered cautiously, as she always did, her hands folded in front of her apron. Michael stood, holding an envelope. "I have something for you," he said. She hesitated, eyes flicking to the envelope as if afraid to touch it. "Sir, Please," he said gently. "Read it." Maya took it with trembling fingers. Her eyes moved slowly over the printed words. A scholarship awarded to Daniel Fred. Full educational sponsorship through the Williams Family Trust. She froze, her lips parting as she looked up at him in disbelief. "Mr. Williams, I can't take this," she whispered, her voice breaking. He smiled faintly. "You already earned it. Just promise me you'll never eat in the rain again." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, tears welled in her eyes, not from pity, but from the overwhelming weight of kindness she had never asked for. When she finally managed to thank him, her voice was barely a breath. And for the first time in years, Michael felt something in his chest ease. Not pride, not triumph, but peace. Outside, the city shimmered beneath the sunlight. The storm at last had passed. The shift was subtle at first, a softness in the air, a quiet hum of something new. Maya began her new role as household coordinator, her blue uniform replaced by a crisp cream blouse and gentle confidence. The staff, once reserved and cautious, now greeted her with easy smiles. The house that had always gleamed with perfection now seemed to glow with warmth. Michael noticed it most in the mornings, where silence used to echo through marble halls. There was now laughter, the clink of cups, the sound of stories shared between shifts. For the first time, the mansion felt lived in. It felt alive. One morning, instead of rushing off to meetings, Michael paused in the kitchen doorway. The staff were gathered around the counter, Maya among them, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Someone cracked a joke, and even Maya laughed, a light, unguarded laugh that filled the room like sunlight through open curtains. "Mr. Williams," she said, startled when she noticed him watching. He smiled. "Got room for one more?" From that day forward, he joined them whenever he could. Over coffee, he learned about their families, their worries, their small triumphs. Thomas, the butler, was caring for his aging mother. Rosa, the cook, was saving for her daughter's nursing school. Each story reminded him of how little he'd known about the people who made his world function, and how much he'd been missing. Word of his change began to spread beyond those walls. At board meetings, his colleagues exchanged puzzled glances. Michael, the once impatient perfectionist, now listened more than he spoke. He asked questions about people, not profits. He smiled more. He cared. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived on his desk, addressed in careful handwriting. Inside was a note that read, "To Mr. Williams, who believed in my mom. Thank you for helping her believe in herself. Daniel Fred." He read it twice, his throat tightening. The letter wasn't long, but it said everything. It was proof that kindness never ends where it begins. It ripples outward, touching lives unseen. Michael set the letter beside a framed photo of his late parents and whispered, "You'd be proud of her." He looked around his house. the laughter drifting from the kitchen, the warmth that filled every corner, and realized something profound. Giving hadn't made him poorer. It had made him whole. Years passed, as quietly as a tide against the Battery Park shoreline. The city changed, buildings rose, faces came and went, but some promises endured. On a gray spring afternoon, the kind that smelled faintly of rain and renewal, Michael Williams found himself seated in a crowded auditorium, his hands clasped, his heart steady. On the stage, a young man in a graduation robe stood among hundreds of others, his cap slightly crooked, his smile radiant. Daniel Fred, Doctor of Medicine. When his name was called, the applause was thunderous, but none louder than Maya's. She clapped through tears, her joy uncontainable, her pride overflowing. Michael glanced at her. The years had softened her face, but not her spirit. She still carried that same quiet dignity, the strength that had once humbled him and still did. When the ceremony ended, they walked together out into the drizzle. The sky wept softly, but the air was warm, gentle, nothing like that storm years ago that had changed them both. Maya turned to him, emotion trembling in her voice. "I still don't know how to thank you, Mr. Williams. Everything Daniel has, it's because of you." He shook his head, smiling faintly. "No, Maya, it's because of you. You showed me what real wealth looks like." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, understanding passing between them. Wordless, deep, unbroken, they stood under the overhang of the building, watching the rain bead and slide down the glass. Students hurried past with umbrellas and laughter, their futures bright and unwritten. For a moment, neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. Michael inhaled the scent of wet pavement, of new beginnings. Years ago, he'd measured his life in profits and possessions. Now, he measured it in people, in the warmth that had returned his home, in the laughter that had filled its rooms, in the hope he'd seen grow from one woman's resilience. He realized then that the rain had never really been the problem. It was the coldness he'd once carried inside. If this story reached a corner of your heart you didn't know was still soft, don't let that feeling fade. Let it move you to notice, to care, to give. Because sometimes kindness doesn't just change someone's life, it saves your own. It had taken a storm to remind him that the richest people are often those who give warmth in a world that's gone cold. And as the rain fell softly around them, neither Maya nor Michael felt cold ever again.